Disruption's on the doorstep of just about everybody. In 2006, we went from an extremely profitable company to 1 year, I think we lost $1 billion.
Andy Billings,
former head of profitable creativity at EA.
We seriously underestimated how hard that transition would be for the company. In the early days, we kind of treated things with the idea that maybe wouldn't last forever. We ran into a massive technology disruption. While we made some really good efforts, we made some serious missteps. For 2 years in a row, we won the Worst Consumer Company Award, and that certainly hurt our pride. Video games have now kind of translated into films and graphic novels and other kinds of entertainment. I think what we finally realized is that...
So before we dive into the crux, if you could just give a little intro to our audience as to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Andy Billings. I am a lifelong change leader. Love working with change, love working with organizations and leaders to help them successfully navigate change. And I've done that throughout my entire career as a management consultant, 25 years at Electronic Arts, where we navigated a very major organizational transformation in the face of massive disruption. Now I've wrapped up that career after a quarter century, and I'm in the give back phase of my career where I'm helping other leaders and organizations grow and build their organization, and disruption's on the doorstep of just about everybody. So what can they do to get prepared?
You mentioned that you've been with EA for 25 years and you've seen so much turnaround in the time that you were there. Maybe map through some of the key turning points in the early years. And you mentioned about disruption, some of the major transformations and what led to that.
That is interesting. Maybe someday we should make a video game about it. I joined the company a number of years after it had gone public. I was usually introduced as adult supervision to a group of mostly young, very young people in their first professional careers following their pursuit of making games. And it was really at the point in the industry where we really didn't know whether it was a fad that would wear off in a couple of years or something that would grow. So we treated things with the idea that maybe wouldn't last forever. So we had a few other products around a paint box and creator tools. We did some financial spreadsheet tools. We just scrounged around to try and figure out what could pull a full business together. When we moved out of our first set of offices, the investors looked at the video game industry and said, yeah, okay, you seem to have a pretty good business, but we're not sure. They built the buildings to be able to lease them to other Silicon Valley technology tenants. They thought, you guys could go out of business. We need to be able to redeploy this building to someone else. Industry's really come a long way to become as bigger than films and other forms of entertainment. Literally around 3 billion players today, maybe on its way to as many as 5 billion into the future. The market, you always see these charts left and up to the right. That's really been the growth model for a very long time in the video game industry. So that's a little bit about kind of the uncertainty of the early years, and it looked like that was going to become an art form. And so the name Electronic Arts was really designed to recognize that we would have artists working in the company, just like you'd have a musical artist. And so we would be a creatively oriented company. My job was to actually foster that creativity, but at the same time, turn it into a business so that we could take something risky and very uncertain, like making a video game and turning it into a hit, and make that something that we could do predictably and reliably and at a profit. So originally we had lots of external artists. And then over time, as we got bigger, we had a reliable set of games to offer. And so we took development inside the company, and then we took publishing inside the company. That publishing meaning kind of the commercial go-to-market component of the industry. And the consoles were just coming out. There were lots of wars between the consoles. Electronic Arts navigated those console wars by not picking a single console to exclusively develop on and to develop across all those consoles. And interestingly, we figured out how to reverse engineer the Sega Saturn one summer, which is considered a little on the edge since they were interested in just having exclusive games developed for that platform. And in fact, the console wars were so intense that one of our founders, Trip Hawkins, wanted to develop a very high quality, capable console called 3DO. And he was so passionate about developing it that he eventually separated out, formed a freestanding console development organization and gave his best effort and quite a bit of significant investment to build that console company, which unfortunately was one of the casualties of that console war. And maybe last thing to say about this part of the history, games were played on PCs, but originally we never thought PCs would last very long. We thought that consoles would give a superior game playing experience. And so we've been really surprised to see that PCs remain a really important platform on which people enjoy and play games and continues to this day. So it didn't turn out to be a casualty of that console war phase. So phenomenally profitable in a relatively simple business model, Peter, where we'd make a game. A game would only take maybe a year to make, sometimes a year and a half. It was brand new. You'd take it to market. You'd launch it at Best Buy or Media Mart in Germany or in the UK. Thursday, you'd come into the store. Lots of people would line up to get their release. You go home and play that game. It was maybe 30 to 40 hours of entertainment. And from us as a game developer, we were pretty much done with the game at that point. We were just going to go on and make the next game. People could enjoy that game. Maybe we'd sequel it. Maybe we'd make another property. But at that point, we were really done. And so our customers were really retailers. And our relationship with our players was much more modest at that time. But the good news at that time was extremely profitable and growing very rapidly.
You mentioned about once a game's out, you were done at that point. But there's another part of the story in respect to Trip's alignment with sports franchises and specifically Madden and how that evolved over the test of time.
Yes. Originally, some controversy over who approached who. Did Madden approach Electronic Arts? Approach Madden? So there's no sense spoiling that mystery to people. But in any event, we connected and we proposed a game to John Madden that would have, I believe it was going to have 6 or 7 players per side instead of the standard 11 a side. John Madden said that will not do. He will not put his name on a game that's not realistic and modern. And so he wanted to have a completely true to life game. And so that really started our partnership with him, where we had our best effort to make realistic games that simulated professional U.S. football. He was a terrific partner because he was really demanding in terms of what would go into the game. And at that time, these were relatively basic games and relatively basic animation, and the characters are blocky. We lived with all of that and was able to ultimately see the evolution of full 3D, photorealistic games. So that was really a foundational part of Electronic Arts, helped us get our sports business going, our sports platform going. And then from there, we branched out into international football, international soccer, as we call it in the US, golf, baseball, and a whole other variety of games. That also was the beginning for us of a licensing approach where we would work with a celebrity or we would work with a professional organization, or we might work with a film and license that idea. And so that was another kind of a big phase of growth where we went through a licensing phase, and it really helped to grow the company substantially by all those external partnerships.
I remember back in the early 90s, I was playing on Sega Mega Drive and the early iterations of FIFA. I remember transitioning to Xbox, and we had the Saturn and other bits in between. But I remember the next key platform for me was the Xbox, and playing Tiger Woods. I was obsessed by Tiger Woods back in the day. And then games like Tony Hawk's, I felt had a massive impact. I know it wasn't one of EA's, but at the time it had that cultural trend, the ability to bring in new players to the environment. And it was just setting the scene. There was loads of amazing content coming out at that point in time. And you mentioned licenses. It's interesting to see the evolution of how licenses have changed now. I know that EA have shifted away from FIFA, for example. It's a very different model as to how they're going to bring out future content for the soccer side of things. But EA had a huge impact on me in my early years as a gamer, and subsequently the time in which I came and worked for them. Yeah, there's a load that went on in that early 90s, but I think that similarly, music can set that cultural trend. Gaming, for my generation at least, has had that same impact.
Yeah. Peter, just to build on your point there, in those early decades in the industry and in electronic arts, there was a sense that this is not an art form, and that people would say, this is not like music, this is not like films, these computer games are somehow synthetic. and not creative. One of the things that we did was to create a program called the Creative Leaders Program, in which we got our game designers and our most creative senior leaders together. And we worked with MIT. We worked with University in Southern California. We started to work with art organizations. We went to museums. We worked with professional musicians with the idea of helping our creative leaders understand, what is an art form and how does it become a cultural force, whether it be electronic entertainment or whether it be literature, plays, or things of that sort. It was designed to do two things. One, to build the confidence of an industry as a creative force. And then secondly, to give them some of the ideas and practices around how are other art forms created and how could we adapt that into electronic art. So we took something that was very ad hoc and very improvisational and done with just a few people in the early years, something that became very substantial with creative roles, music, soundtracks, visual, theming, art direction, stories and characters that had plots and depth to them. All of that started to evolve the game world really into I'd say a cultural force that could not only just follow culture, but also start to shape culture. And I think it was a big day in the history of electronic arts when the first music group approached us to ask if they could break their new musical offering into one of our games as part of the soundtrack. When the game launched, it would be the launch of their song. That seemed like a pretty cool pivoting point in the industry.
Who was the band, if you don't mind me asking?
I believe it was an early rap song. I'm not sure I can quite remember it, but I do remember at the time that we got excited enough that we actually formed a music publishing label and hired a professional music producer into the company. And that was the beginning of a partnership with the music industry.
Yeah, and the soundtracks are so iconic. You can jump on Spotify or go onto YouTube and there's copious amounts of EA soundtracks for games. And like that cultural alignment, there's a nostalgia piece. You can remember through songs what you were playing back in the day, and it has a real big impact on my generations and also the ones that followed. I'm interested in getting your take on how leaders shape the future, because that's quite a big thing for you.
Let me talk about the disruption that rocked electronic arts and talk about how we use leadership development as a response, as a coping mechanism to deal with that massive amount of disruption. Back where I left off that story, we were making games that were sold at retail and that had no live service. Internet was just emerging at that time. Strategy was to sell through retail channels. That was around not quite 20 years ago. A couple of forces came along. The internet, live services, higher technology games, and we ran into a massive technology disruption where competitors were creating available through the internet with a very long life cycle after them in which people actually enjoyed playing with each other. The first model was play with your friends in your living room. And the new model looked to be you're going to play with friends and maybe even people you've never met before globally. And so in 2006, we went from an extremely profitable company to 1 year, I think we lost out of a $4 billion turnover, we lost $1 billion. And so we realized we are really in desperate shape here. You can't lose 25% of your revenues every year and survive very long, even if you have quite a cash reserve. So we realized that we had a massive disruption to take on, and we used leadership development as a tool to help the company rethink our business model and our organizational model really from all dimensions of it. So for instance, the way we reached our players was through retail. Now we could reach them electronically and digitally. Our model used to be just a unit sale. Now it became a live service. We seriously underestimated how hard that transition would be for the company. And we used leadership development to help us think about the depth of the change and how we would respond to the change. And we had leadership development of a couple of flavors. One of them were groups of 10 to 12 people that would come together for 6 or 8 months and try and work on a particular problem, like how are we going to change our approach going to market, or how are we going to make games in a different way, or how do we break into a new genre? And we would call those strategic action teams or breakthrough teams. And then we also had cohorts of people that we would work with for about 1.5 to 2 years. And that would bring along a certain type of leader, like a producer in the game industry or people that are responsible for both the creative and the commercial side of the game. And we were desperately short of those people. And we also needed those people to be attuned to leading through a transformational period in the life of the company. And all those leader programs helped people become not only better leaders in the classic people and organizational leadership, but be better business people, better business thinkers that could be thinking about how to completely change our business model. So we've run leader development programs for more than a couple of decades to provide future leaders inside the company. So the idea of leaders shape the future is if you can get the right leaders, hold on to them, retain them, appreciate them, recognize them, give them growth opportunities, and give them some of the skills and concepts, they become your change agents.
I remember when I was out at DICE for a little bit and I first came into contact with one of your SLX Studio Leadership Accelerator teams. And yeah, just the conversations that were flowing there. It was really inspiring to me that we had a group of people that were really focused on cultivating that future conscious thinking and behavior to drive more awareness to not just about the short-term goals that the company had, but equally, what does a company look like in the next 5-10 years, and how do we get there, and what does the whole landscape look like in the future? I think when we have the opportunity to sit back and reflect and look at industry as a whole, I think that's when the best learnings and best lessons come from, because we take the time to imagine what's possible rather than just focus on the short term.
That reminds me of some of the content we put into those programs. We always kept refreshing the content because our understanding what the future was going to be continued to evolve. Well, Peter, I don't think anyone can completely predict the future. We can certainly anticipate what it may look like. We can anticipate some of those trends. And so in our leader development experiences, we would ask leaders to go 2 to 3 years into the future and try and solve the issues that we would see the company facing in 2 to 3 years, whether it be, how are you going to make a game globally with development people in 5 or 6 different locations? How would you make a game working with very sophisticated outsourcing partners? How would you make a game that maybe had a merchandising and retail partnership associated with it? Some of those scenarios came true, and some of those ideas then would stick inside the company since we'd already simulated those kinds of experiences. And so that to us was how you prepare for the future. As best you can, go to the future in practice.
How were those people chosen, and where did the people end up that were part of these studio leadership teams?
We had a variety of focus points for those leader programs, depending on where we were short in terms of having a group of people prepared to take on a certain role. Let me just tell you a little bit about what I mean. In the banking industry that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's a whole pool of people that understand how to lead banking organizations, how to lead them technically, how to lead them organizationally. For us, there was no earlier generation of game leaders. So there weren't people that understood how to lead game organizations, especially in a very rapidly changing field. So we couldn't take MBAs and we couldn't take people out of competitors because they just weren't available. So our challenge was really to build and create our own leaders that were sophisticated about the game industry and were ready to work through all that massive change and disruption that we were starting to see come. So sometimes we would have programs that really focused on studio leaders. That was the Studio Leader Accelerator program that you talked about. Sometimes we realize we will need a group of people that are going to be more general managers and general organizational leaders, and we would have a program tailored to that where they had different experiences. Sometimes we trained software development leaders. We had programs that would focus on marketing leaders to try and help them understand the new emerging marketing methods and practices, and how would you lead a go-to-market organization. Over a number of decades, we just had a variety of different programs, each with a little different focus. So I think you could probably hear my bias is that the best leadership development experiences are things which are one, just in time. So just before you go into that role, or even early days of being in that role, it's got the content and experiences that are really relevant to the specific industry that you're in. our programs always had either, if you want to call them that, faculty, leaders, content presenters that were in the company or were from partners, so that we didn't typically have an MBA professor come. We would have a industry leader, might have a musician, might have a television expert or a sports marketing guru. So those would be some of the external people. And then we just, as I mentioned before, we just mixed in all of that simulation work. So what we're really doing, we're trying to fill in holes in our talent plan, our people plan. And the idea of acceleration, if you're trying to grow your company and you need a certain kind of leader to be successful, if you can take your existing people that are not quite ready and accelerate their readiness, thus the word accelerate, maybe get them ready for more senior roles 2 to 3 years earlier than they would on their own, that's a huge business advantage because you now have the leaders. So for instance, in the Studio Leaders Accelerator, we realized we have more opportunities to make games than we have the people to make them. We've got partners, we have license opportunities, we have lots of growth there, but we really don't have the people that are capable to do it. So we came up with the accelerator to take promising people. That was a selection criteria. Also people that we thought would want to stay with the company, another criteria. And then we work with them intensively with the idea that they would spin out of the program and then take more senior responsible roles. So over the course of a number of decades, a large number of the people in the organization were alumni out of these accelerator programs. And the general management accelerator programs, I think right now in the C-suite of Electronic Arts, about a third of those people are alumni out of these accelerator programs. And they would give a lot of credit to those internal leadership experiences, as opposed to only growing by external hires with people that you picked out organizations that were substantially bigger and were ready to take on those areas of responsibility. So the idea of taking high potential people and accelerating them, making them go fast in their career, turned out to be a pretty big business advantage.
You also set up the EA University, but before I ask the question about what was the advantages, I wanted to understand the difference in shift of culture between when you first joined EA at the beginning of your 25-year tenure to when you started implementing the studio leadership programs. How did that impact EA's culture at the time?
EA University, which is our internal learning and development organization, since been renamed, but that's what we called it in those early years. And the accelerators, these were specifically designed to be change initiatives. We realized we were being massively disrupted. We realized we were going to grow. We realized that there was no existing pool of game company leaders to draw from, to hire out of. So all of these leader and learning programs out of EA University were designed to create an organization filled with people that loved games and were technically qualified to take on increasingly responsible positions. So EA University was started and funded out of our studios organization. Paul Lee, our studio COO at the time, realized that we didn't have enough high capability artists that could do their craft on computers. And so he funded the start of EA University, which is designed to be like the internal development arm to get people up and ready to make games using the latest technology available at the time. Today, in the games industry, there are freestanding programs and academies where you can get your career started. But at the time, there wasn't a place to learn that. So we provided all of it ourselves. Peter, one of the other things I think that people really enjoyed about being participants at EA University wasn't necessarily go and take a class. EA University always went to the game teams, and the learning format was game that you're making, whether that be the visual content for an artist or the software content for a software engineer. And let's expose you to new ideas, new tools, new methodology, shortcuts, advancements as you work on your own game. Staff from Electronic Arts University went out into the studios and out into the game teams and embedded with those teams for months at a time to help lift a team at a critical juncture. So it wasn't a bricks and mortar, leave your job and take get a degree. It was EA University came to you and work with you. And we see that learning model a lot these days with things like online learning experiences where you're getting very short bursts of learning, 2-3 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe take a couple of hours of courses online. That kind of models has been pretty effective, short, easy to absorb, don't disrupt people's work productivity. In fact, use their work experiences as part of the learning experience. So that was one of the hallmarks of EA University.
One of the other things from an industry perspective, in the 2010s, there was another massive disruption in respect to the shift from packaged goods to more digital. Everybody saw the opportunities in live servicing, esports, subscriptions, mobile. How did that impact the leaders of the time? And also, how did EA shift towards that change in landscape and embrace this new disruption that was occurring in industry?
Good question. So remember, there was the early days were the sunshine, no clouds in the sky. Everyone's happy, making great games. Industry's growing. Went into this massive period of disruption. We had a big recession in there, 2008. The internet was appearing. The technology was now available that you could distribute games digitally and play them in a live service way. And so I think maybe one of the lessons learned for anyone that's working through a transformation is to be very thoughtful about the depth of transformation required. Remember, we're a packaged goods company migrating into a live service environment. That's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week kind of environment. While we made some really good efforts, we made serious missteps and had some serious setbacks. Let me talk about a couple of them. For 2 years in a row, we won the Worst Consumer Company Award, and we beat out some exciting competitors like cable companies and banking companies. In our pride, we took that pretty seriously around how is it that we could win that award. And I think what we finally realized is that we really weren't as closely in touch with our players as we thought we were. Remember, we came from an organization where our customers were the retailers. The players were the end users. Yes, we understood them, but we didn't understand them in a live service, understanding every keystroke that they're making. So we set about doing a series of changes in the company to get more insights into those players. We started bringing players into our studios. They started looking at our concepts. We started play testing our games dramatically earlier. Remember now, games had gone from being something you could do within a year to something now a major new game could take 3 to 5 years. So we started bringing players in. We started forming relationships with deep and experienced players that would like a genre. So for instance, they might be FIFA football players, and they would come in. They were experts in the game, and they would play the early thoughts about the new game. As the game was being developed, they would try out the new features and give us intensive feedback. Many of those kinds of players became the streamers and influencers that we know today. That became another way to understand not only the audience, but begin to reach audience in a completely different way and making players really part of the organization. And so you had titles appearing in the company like head of player experience and head of player relationships. We started hiring people whose job was to get closer and tighter to that player audience. So that was on the customer experience side, get much closer to those players. Another misstep actually cost us our CEO at the time. So disruptions actually are longer and harder than a lot of us like to think. We were making a game called SimCity 4, which is it's an architectural game, a building game. It was going to be our first effort at an online service game where your cities were residents in the internet. We seriously underestimated the difficulty of running a live service of that type on a global basis. We probably also discovered things about the company around willingness to take feedback, peer review, engineering architectural reviews. Some really important changes need to be made in the way we made games and in the way we help each other make games. So the weekend that game launched, the game crashed severely and people lost their cities and they lost like a weekend of their time. And we'd been promising them like the most phenomenal experience you're ever going to have online. The players were just incensed and we really struggled to get the game back up. The game had much bigger demand than we expected. We got millions more players than we were thinking. The way we had our servers configured around the world didn't turn out to be able to handle that capacity. And we had a hard time getting our servers and capacity backup. That seriously hurt our image. That certainly hurt our pride. It caused us to take a deep look at how we made games and how we had reviews and all that work you do before you launch a game to make sure it's really tested and ready. We launched that game in the last quarter of a difficult fiscal year, and that game didn't hit its financial expectations. That led to the year not hitting its financial expectations. John Riccitiello was our CEO at the time, as a CEO needs to do. When you seriously miss your financial expectations, the CEO has to take that responsibility. So John Riccitiello resigned associated with that whole experience. And people really loved John Riccitiello, charismatic, champion of game development, a gamer, and so forth. So it was a really dark day when John Riccitiello said, given the light of where we are, I need to step away from the company. And it triggered yet another wave for us of doubling down on the whole transformation effort and taking even more seriously the amount of change that we would need to take in all parts of the company to seriously become a player in the live services world. So fortunately, we've moved on from that, moved into that live service. And now today we're around 90% digital and about 10% retail in terms of the sales of our games can be played online. And most of our games have a multiplayer dimension to them. But it's taken about 15, depending on how you want to date it, 15 to 20 years to make the transition from consumer packaged software sold at retail to a fully online live service experience for players with an experience that can go for 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
Who came after John? Was that the time that Andrew came in?
Larry Probst had been our chairman and the very long-term CEO of the company. When John Riccitiello left, we didn't have an immediate successor, number one. Number two, the organization was pretty shocked by all of that. It's a pretty proud organization. The idea was to have a veteran come back and try and turn the company around and dig into some of those issues and then find out who would be the next CEO. So the idea was that Larry Probst, as the chairman, would come back and also run the company for a period of time. And then Andrew Wilson became the CEO a couple of years later, I think.
Andrew's been at the helm for quite a while now. How would you assess the evolution of EA under Andrew? And also, from a brand perspective, how would you assess EA's brand, both internally and externally? Because long before I started at EA, there was always quite a negative touch about EA in respect to releasing games that weren't quite finished. And there was a definite disconnect between the player universe, as we went on to call it, to also internally to the company. How would you assess brand and also the evolution?
Yeah, good question. The really deep dynamic here is between a creative organization and a business organization. A creative organization would like to take as many years as it takes to get a game to the level of excellence and quality that you would like. A business would like to have games developed in a predictable way at a defined cost and make it all very predictable. We were now at this point starting to become big enough to have a portfolio of games, and we changed the way we reviewed our games during their life cycle, and we began to not set release dates artificially before the game had even been planned and developed. It was like, Peter, you and I are going to make a game. We're not sure exactly what it is, but it's going to release in 3 years on March 31st. In the creative process, we wanted to first plan the development of the game and get a sense of how long it was going to take to develop that game. And then we would set the release date. And that would help us make sure that we had enough time to get the game to a higher level of quality than we might necessarily if we just fixed the release date. And so that really helped us make consistently higher quality games and deal with a legitimate player concern. How consistently good are your games? I think the other dynamic in the games industry is that players are very vocal. At least 1% of the player group is very vocal. If they're not happy about something, they let the world know. There are lots of now digital arenas to do that. There's a whole component of the game players group that wasn't adjusting to the idea that you would monetize games, that there would be a business of games. The game might be free to play, free to buy, but the business needed to generate money. And so there was a lot of player frustration with why do I have to, if it's a racing game, why do I have to pay to have a new look or feel for my car? Maybe it's a microtransaction. And so both Electronic Arts and the games industry really struggled to introduce that concept clearly so that people understood, yes, the game's going to be free in this way, but you're going to have opportunities to spend money on it. The other thing that I think we learned, the industry learned, was to still make the game fair and enjoyable if it was a free-to-play game to those that didn't want to spend money on the game. And so spending money on the game didn't necessarily give, if I had a big wallet and you didn't, that doesn't mean that I could outcompete you or win the game, Peter. That would mean I might have a different look and feel and I might have some cool gear or weapons, but it didn't unbalance the game. And so that's another big change that's taken place is the games are still fun and accessible, whether you want to pay money or you don't want to pay money. And so that was another kind of lesson learned, a lot from just working with players and getting player input, player feedback. And you asked about Andrew, how did he do? Andrew grew up making games, grew up inside the company, grew up inside the studios, worked on FIFA and our sports games, and had a very deep feel for what's involved in making games, that it's important to release games when they're ready to be released, not like the Sims 4 experience or other games that didn't delight and excite the players the way we would like them to be. And so he was able to build a planning process that would allow for some unpredictability and some potential slips in the release of games. So you had a set of games that would release very regularly, and then marbled into that could be games that were a little more unpredictable when they were released, but you release them when they reached higher quality. That's helped our image with players. I would think, though, forever players are going to be a very restless, irreverent, demanding group. So I don't imagine that any game company is ever going to get rave reviews from everybody.
I guess not every gamer are going to vent their views on what a specific game is like. And I remember we used to be quite obsessed with Metacritic scores and so on and so forth. But I think to EA's advantage, one of the biggest things that, in my opinion, that they did was double down on quality over quantity. Look back into the back catalogue, we were releasing lots and lots of games over a long duration of time. And the question should be asked whether the games that were released were of quality or was it just a case of quantity? And I guess also as we went through the numerous disruptions and transformations that you mentioned, one of the things that companies often do when they go through periods of transformation is they set clear concepts or clear pillars. To get your take on the pillars that EA set in respect to results through relationships, team of leaders, play to win strategies, and the foresight, insight, action model.
Those are all initiatives and approaches that we use to just help the company become a more effective company and work itself through a major set of transformations. We spent a lot of time on vision and purpose, maybe more time than other companies would typically spend. So we polled the entire company around, what do you think the company should be? Where do you think it's going? What do you think the purpose of the company is all about? We spent a lot of time on, what do you think the values of the company should be around creativity, achievement, productivity? What should be the climate for the people that work there? And out of that, we came to a vision statement that was inspire the world to play. Didn't necessarily mean play video games, just meant to inspire the world to have a more playful, lighter sense of enjoyment with their world. And that the way we would contribute to that is to make the world's greatest games. By framing ourselves as an entertainment company and a company about play as opposed to being a technology company was a big shift in the mindset and the culture. Being the best games company didn't necessarily mean the biggest one, but be the best one. Also really emphasize this idea of quality and meeting player expectations. And so you often hear in conversations, hey, that's not what a best games company would do. That practice you've got going, is that something? And they would hold it up to that purpose, that filter, and say, one, is that inspiring the world to play? And two, is that compatible with us being the world's greatest games company? And so that led us to have a lot of internal debate about what was working well, keep it, what wasn't working well, what didn't measure that value set, and how would we go about making those changes? The games industry is organizations are pretty decentralized in their studio, but segments and help make the company a more cohesive community. One of the things that we would do a lot of to build culture and to support our purpose. You could call them lots of things, and we did, but they are basically celebrations of making games and celebrations of the people making the games. We call them summits, town halls, different kinds of conferences. We would regularly invest in getting people together, getting people inspired, excited, charged up about games. We'd have players come in. We'd have all kinds of experiences for people that would come to those things. And so they were really like revive the spirit, revive your engagement, revive your motivation. They were entertaining. They were engaging. And that kind of reached the hearts and souls of people in the company to keep them connected, to help them have the right mindset to approach what's it going to take for us to be a successful games company. So lots of investments there over the years.
One of the things that a lot of companies are doing now, you mentioned purpose, but so many companies are looking at the changing landscape and they're realizing that the world has changed. We're entering into very much a creator economy at the moment. And also in respect to the geopolitical challenges that we face, the landscape of the economy is evolving almost on a daily basis. What do you feel is going to be that next transformation, that next iteration? When I look at the landscape at the moment, I'm very much intrigued by some of these cross-pollination of content. So if you see things like The Last of Us or Arcane that goes onto Netflix, that's really intriguing to me. And likewise, you mentioned things like the metaverse, but also the impact of AI. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, those are lots more disruption at our doorstep. Peter, I think you and I have been talking about the idea that disruption is probably one of your constant companions as an organization. You might survive one set of disruptive forces only to have a few quiet years and then to face more disruptions. That's definitely true in the entertainment world. You covered a lot of challenges. First of all, the technology is really impressive in terms of how to deliver a digital experience to a global audience. So our ability to put things up in the cloud through Amazon, Microsoft, Google, their cloud services allow us to put very complex games with a huge amount of information in them and make those available globally around the world with a very short latency in terms of the delivery. So for anyone that's not in the gaming business, latency just means the length of time between when you push a game controller or a key on your keyboard and how long it takes to actually respond in the game in front of you visually. Those capabilities are now so impressive that you feel like you are there. You feel like those are real-time interactions with your friends, with players, and with the characters in the screen. So that's been a huge transformation. And I imagine it's going to continue. And you talked about the merging of experiences. Video games have now translated into films, graphic novels, and other kinds of entertainment. So I think in the future, we'll continue to see that blur where you're going to be able to see linear film content in a game. You're going to be able to play the film. You're going to be able to play that experience. And with the technology capacity that we've got, we're going to be able to have a substantially greater repertoire of game experiences, ranging from very small games to things that would take hours and hours for you to play and master. I think that's important because the attention span of entertainment consumers has gotten shorter and shorter. The average video experience now is something like 10 seconds. We expect to see video with good sound and good video quality, and it's going to be very brief, and there'll be a huge amount of it. So the future of entertainment is going to become much more transmedia, where it's going to be a story, a character, an experience, and you can experience it on your mobile phone. You can experience it in your living room, on a console or a PC. You can go to a theater. You're going to start to recognize that intellectual property, that character, that story, that narrative. You're going to enjoy it in lots of different places, and other Disney experiences that have that mass marketing ability to show up in all kinds of different experiences. So I think exciting time for entertainment, and challenging because now you've got creative forms and technology forms at which once used to be separate, now we're starting to blend and to merge. Where I think we're going to see this most is going to be in the area of sports, where people are watching a professional sporting event on television. They're texting and interacting with content from that sports events on their mobile phone. Maybe they're playing some parts of it on a video game. Who knows what's coming next, where people can go in and talk or interact with others around that particular sports content. There's an example of what the future of sports entertainment might look like.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we talk about cloud, I remember when EA acquired GameFly out in Israel. And I thought that was a fantastic acquisition back in the day because it was quite forward thinking as to what we were aiming to do. But then equally, when you look at the broad spectrum of how the entire landscape is evolving, you mentioned about duration of time, people pay attention. I heard it was like 3 seconds or something ridiculous. People's attention spans are shorter, but then still at the very same time, the longer form content is providing an awful lot of value. We have huge scope. And this is where, when I was at EA, I used to get frustrated because I'd be like, we have huge scope in respect to our legacy or our back catalogue, and we're not utilizing that to the extent that we could. So we did have a little go with EA Play and EA Access, but it wasn't to the types of models that we see with Netflix. But then again, we have real opportunity to partner with partners such as Netflix to do these cross collaborations. I think we have to be aware when we collaborate just as to the importance of franchise, because as we grow, we've got to make sure that we don't cannibalize our key franchises, but equally we allow space, time, and almost like a sandboxing experience somewhere of an area for these franchises to grow and evolve, because people look to things like FIFA or they look to things like Call of Duty. They get stale after a period of time. There's only so many first-person shooters that you can play before you think, actually, there's something out there for more compelling narratives. And that's where we can look back to BioWare and the titles that they used to bring out. There was amazing depth of story and content and storytelling. I think that although people do have short attention spans, that deeper immersive content, I think is still going to be key. But ultimately, how do we deliver that? Is it with partnerships with others, or do we double down and actually try and create something internally? That's still a decision point that I think is still there for EA to solve.
Yeah, Peter, good point. Maybe the thread that pulls them all together would be around being a good storyteller, being an effective creator of a narrative with plots and characters and emotions that hold our attention. And you'll have storytellers that are expert in games. You'll have storytellers that are expert in film. There'll be new storytelling experts as we go to whatever the metaverse becomes. And so I would imagine that we'll be collaborating, whether it's all under the same organizational and partner to partner. But imagine that thread of storytelling is going to be a key part, because that emotional engagement is what will hold on to people's attention longer than the 3 seconds you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's the same, not just within the games industry, but further afield. We're both in transformational change and do a lot within consultancy. But that ability to really create that emotional pull. If you look at things like movement thinking, for example, which we chatted a while ago with a guy called Scott Goodson, and the power of movement thinking, the ability to really galvanize people both internally and externally. You can only really do that if there's some form of embedding into an emotion and embedding into a kind of a societal change or an event that you can almost wrap that around. And I think when companies start investing more in those that can articulate a really compelling story and create layers and levels of emotion to it, then we are going to get more complex and more from, be that gaming or wider media as a whole.
Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to. And you talked about the creator economy, which kind of gets everyone into the experience of creating and contributing. I think artificial intelligence is going to enable us to make it easier for people to create modifications or content or stories. And we're going to see that go from 1% of people participating in entertainment to something that's bigger. And games like Roblox, which are amazingly effective at holding people's attention, is really about the ability to allow people to have fun by creating things and sharing them with each other.
How do you think that the increased presence of AI in games and the wider cultural response to technology will shape the industry's future?
A couple thoughts on that. One is something I'm pretty sure about and something that I'm not so sure about. We've been using various forms of artificial intelligence in game development for at least 10 years. We've been using it to test games. So you can simulate a game being played with an artificial intelligence environment. And you can have that game played 100,000 times. And then out of that, you can see where's the game fun, where does it get slower, are there issues and bugs by having human testers do that, just couldn't do the numbers. You can also generate software code, and you can generate content, meaning I could generate landscapes and pictures, characters and things of that sort by using artificial intelligence. So we've been able to use it to keep the cost of entertainment down. As these games get bigger and bigger, more complex, the stories get more complex, it gets more and more expensive to build a game. Artificial intelligence has been a way of keeping the cost down so that players can get a pretty complex, deep experience at not a lot more money than it used to cost.
How do you think that AI has improved the personal gaming experience?
First of all, you probably wouldn't have a Sims 4 crash experience. That would probably be detected and solved in the testing phase. I think that you get much more content available with artificial intelligence, and you get a better play experience because the game has been played literally hundreds of thousands of times in a simulated environment. And so all of that goes to polishing and making the experience better. The street and you see a self-driving car that's out there practicing, all of that's going to make that car a better car for us when we actually in there and it's driving for us. So I think improved experience is probably one of the biggest things. But I was going to say, Peter, in terms of the unknown, is the generation of new ideas and new content is really uncertain. Most entertainment companies are not using AI to generate intellectual property because we're not sure who owns the copyright to that. And companies like Electronic Arts are very respectful of intellectual property ownership. We don't want to use content that was, you developed it and I got it through an artificial intelligence application and now it's in my game, but you actually created that. So I think the challenge is going to be how we will come to understand what content that's artificially generated can we use in the creation of new entertainment, new intellectual property, whether that's games or a new book or a new, whatever that might be. I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge. And someone's going to come in, I think, and figure out, developers like games companies, and say, this content, we know that it's available for you to use without violating someone else's intellectual property rights. So that's a really uncertain point in the future, I think.
How do you think it's impacting players' expectations?
Early to tell, I think, is probably how I'd respond to that one. GPT Chat is the fastest growing application, I think, that we've seen. 200 million active users. Early to know how that's going to shape expectations. I don't know. What do you think?
From a quality perspective, I think we can look at it from a multitude of different ways. We can look at it from a coding perspective. We can look at it from a in-game character perspective. We can create a lot with AI that is going to be for the advancement of the experience. But then equally, it's back to that emotional constraint, the emotional fiber that I mentioned earlier, the advancement of technology at the speed it's going versus how it benefits people and the emotional connection and the connectivity behind human connection. I think there needs to be some sort of parallel or parity that goes there. It's like making any decision. You can go at the speed of light if you really want to, but to what impact is that going to have on the industry, on people, on our society as a whole? I think I'm definitely in favor of technology and the advancement of technology, but any transformation, like any disruption, should be a friend, not a foe. But then equally, we should have that moment of pause, of reflection, to look back at the landscape and the lay of the land of how far we've traveled in order to really progress forward. I think that we just need time. We need that period of stoic thought to look upon the landscape and make sure that what we create is for the benefit of people and the advancement of, if it's games, the advancement of the entertainment rather than any short-term means or desires. I think we could also build in value structures. I think there's a lot to be said at this point in time to be building in value structures into the AI or machine learning and to align those values to be more empathetic, more caring, more transparent. And then equally as companies, like I saw Wired, the first company that I've seen that have got like an AI policy, more policy perspective as to what we're going to do. I just think at this point in time, there's a good opportunity to assess what we want the future to be. It's not the fact that the future is not something that is full of opportunity and hope. I think it definitely is. And we definitely have an opportunity ahead of us to create a future for the benefit of everybody. But I don't believe there's a lot of time being taken into how quickly we're evolving and what impact that will have on wider society as a whole. And I think these are just legitimate questions that any good leader at this point in time will be thinking, that how am I impacting my team, or how are these decisions directly contributing to their advancement and their development. I just think that we've got a real good opportunity to almost come together as a collective and plot what the future looks like for everybody. And I think we can plot it to be a future that's full of opportunity, full of quality, full of deep immersion and amazing technology and amazing skills. But I just think that we're maybe going a bit too fast at this point in time.
Yeah, I certainly like the idea of having an ethical code based on at least a transparent set of values that would guide the use of the technology. By transparent, that allows us to have a debate on what should be the values that guide us around political violence. It would be good to try and articulate what our values are in terms of, is AI compatible with them or not? And so important in the world of entertainment that we now recognize has such a culture shaping influence on the world. Important to have those things very well articulated to guide the design and the application and the use, so that these things don't get done in an inadvertent, unaware standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. The cultural impact is really what we want to align, both the cultures that we create within companies and also the wider culture at large. And maybe just to finish out the AI element, what are your thoughts as to the cultural implications that AI is having, both at a company perspective and also wider society? And also the games industry too.
Yeah, I think it's just one of the impacts of AI is the intense discussion and debate it's going to cause on so many things that we take for granted or don't ever discuss or are assumed. For instance, what does plagiarism mean? What does creativity mean? Does that mean that somehow the ideas are all unique, or is creativity somehow the assembling or the application of those ideas? AI and writing essays, poetry, books, creating games, software. I think it's going to cause a really constructive debate on what's acceptable in the future. And is it going to be okay to say something is created by AI versus created by humans? And will we be able to make such a distinction? I think the other impact is it's going to be the next chapter in how humans work with machines. We've always worked with tools and then increasingly complex machines. Most of us that work in office environments, we don't give a second thought to the fact that we spend most of our day with a keyboard within hand's reach, and much of our day looking at screens and interacting digitally. We're getting so closely interconnected and intertwined. My water heater will talk to me. My water heater will decide when the shower is ready. My refrigerator will be thinking about the food. My entertainment will be thinking about what mood am I in and what will be most entertaining for me at the moment. I think it'd be very interesting to see how this goes in a constructive way where humans are having a better life experience aided by artificial intelligence as opposed to hindered by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, for sure. We've talked about AI and what the future may look like, but what do you envisage to be the biggest challenges aside from AI for the games industry, and also the biggest opportunities?
I think the biggest challenge for the games industry is going to be how to harmonize or profit creative development, entertainment development, versus entertainment's just developed for the fun and the joy of it by all of us probably create our own forms of entertainment. Whether that's drawing, or we're going to start to see how to put for-profit entertainment together with this creator environment and the ability for people to self-create using artificial intelligence and all the advanced tools and content that's available, and finding out, way for both of these to provide the best experience for people. I don't think it's a either or. In terms of opportunities, I think it's around storytelling. How are we going to harness all of this technology and all of these advancements to make even more immersive, interesting, engaging story experiences, which may have social relevance, may have social impact, which would be the long line of tradition of all kinds of creative art forms, is to really just advance the human experience, the emotionality of living our lives. And I think that's the biggest opportunity, is to make richer lives rather than to make things which are homogenous, gray, standard. So how can we provide variety that's really brings joy and happiness to people, as opposed to just simply burn up your time and pass the time.
Yeah, for sure. I could talk to you all day. It's been absolutely fascinating. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And just to close it out, if you have any like key thoughts and takeaways that you'd like to leave with our audience, that'd be great.
I think that maybe just one thought that comes out of our conversation, Peter, is just we're unleashing the ability for anyone, anywhere in the world to have an influence and impact by communicating, by entertaining, by sharing information through these digital interfaces and tools. And if we can create that in a ethical, high value way, we're going to create a really great experience for the future, opportunity for everybody on the planet.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Peter, great conversation. Thanks.